Next feature is Laura Brodie. Laura is a visiting professor of English at Washington University and a new member of NAVA. She published two novels, a memoir, and a history of coeducation at the Virginia Military Institute. As the memory of the Civil War suffuses markedly, it's perhaps not surprising, but she brings us a paper on the early symbol of the Confederacy.
So yes, I am an English professor. I'm not a flag specialist, but I am coming here because I've been told that this is the place to be. And I just wanted to tell you how I came to write this, because as you're told, I am from Lexington, Virginia, which is known as the Shrine of the South, because Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson are buried in my town. And what that means is that for the last 30 years of my life, I've been living in a town where there is a lot of controversy over the Confederate battle flag. And in recent years, a lot of people have been taking down their Confederate battle flags in Lexington. Many of them are putting up the Gadsden flag because it's a colonial flag instead. This is progress. It is a defiant rebel flag. But what they don't realize is that the Don't Tread on Me Rattlesnake combination was the Confederates' favorite choice before they turned to the Confederate battle flag. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. But nobody seems to know this because nobody is talking about the 19th century history of the Don't Tread on Me flag, which I point out, Don't Tread on Me flag instead of Gadsden flag, because there were several Don't Tread on Me flags during the colonial period. And the one the Confederates were using wasn't necessarily yellow all the time. When I first discovered this material, I wrote about it in the Washington Post. But before I did that, I sent it to several Civil War historians, including James McPherson, Pulitzer Prize winning author of Battle Cry Freedom. And he's like, this is great. You need to get this out there. And John Koski, with the book on the Confederate battle flag, he said, go to NAVA. They are the experts. You all can educate me more. I've already been learning more from Peter Ansoff about Gadsden. You can tell me what you know about any of this or the colonial history, and I will share what I have learned. So we're going to begin in 1930 with D.W. Griffith, who is the filmmaker in Hollywood who wants to extend an olive branch to history. He's doing this because in 1915, he is the person who put together The Birth of a Nation, a notorious film today because of its celebration of the Ku Klux Klan, and it helped participate to a resurgence of the Klan in the early 20th century. So at the end of his career in 1930, he makes a biographical film on Abraham Lincoln. Now, if you watch Griffith's Abraham Lincoln, early in that film, it begins with the four Virginians sitting around a table. They're looking at a Virginia newspaper. The date on the newspaper is February 12th, 1809, Lincoln's birthday, well before the beginning of the Civil War, 1861. But they are already angry with the Union. They're saying, we need to secede. They're saying the Union is trying to strangle us, ruin us. And what they say is, we'll run up the rattlesnake flag again instead of those damn stars. The damn stars, you can't see them. They're cut off at the top of the stars and stripes on that thing, but they're pointing to the U.S. flag and saying, no more of the damn stars. We're going to go back to the rattlesnake flag again. Say, what rattlesnake flag? Now, the screenwriter for this film was Stephen Vincent Benet, a very famous poet. 2 years previously, he had published John Brown's Body, his epic poem. So he was remembering something about the Civil War era that we seem to have forgot today, which is that when the secessionists first launched their movement, their go-to flag was the old colonial flag, because they said, we are part of a second American Revolution. They wanted to go back to an American colonial flag. Now today, Americans identify that Don't Tread on Me rattlesnake combination with the Gadsden flag. And as you all know, this flag came about in 1775. It was resurrected by the Tea Party movement in 2010. It's a favorite among gun rights advocates, although liberal advocates take the Don't Tread on Me message and use it as they will. But you'll find it on 14 states' license plates today. You can buy the Gadsden flag. Idaho and Iowa are the most recent states to join the Gadsden flag license plates. A lot of people who like this flag say that it symbolizes their fight against federal overreach. What they don't realize is that Confederates did the exact same thing in 1860. Most histories of the Gadsden flag won't tell you about the 19th century, though. So people don't know this. The Encyclopedia Britannica is straight from the colonial period, the modern period. Rob Walker, when he wrote The New Yorker on the shifting symbolism of the Gadsden flag, again, colonial period, modern period. PBS, excellent documentary. Thank you, Peter Anson, for helping with it. There was one illustration in the back from the Civil War period, but again, colonial period, modern period. So, and what we know from the colonial period changing. I just learned something before this. I was about to say Gadsden designed the yellow flag, and Peter saying, we don't know who designed it. He introduced it to the South Carolina State Legislature. We know that Essex Hopkins, first commander-in-chief of the American Navy, had a version of this flag. If you look at 19th century newspapers, you'll see it associated with John Paul Jones. But we also know that the general design is a shout out to Ben Franklin's Point or Die woodcut, which showed the colonies segmented. This Gadsden version was not the only Don't Tread on Me flag, which is one reason, again, why my title of my talk today is about the Don't Tread on Me iconography. If you look at newspapers in 1881, you'll see a lot of references in a bunch of Midwestern newspapers. This article about colonial flags, and what this article claims is that the oldest Rattlesnake flag is that of the West Brigade in Westmoreland, Pennsylvania. And here you can read a whole description of what that flag looked like. So again, this is something circulating in 1881, talking about the Pennsylvania flag being the first example of it. There's also the Culpeper Minutemen's Don't Tread on Me Rattlesnake flag, which probably has Liberty or Death on it because Patrick Henry had just been made commander of Virginia's colonial forces at this time. So Don't Tread on Me Rattlesnake, I'm speaking more about that symbology than about the particular Gadsden flag influence in the Confederacy. But what is interesting is that after the Revolutionary War, the eagle largely replaces the snake as America's favorite emblem. And it is in November of 1860 that the secessionists decide to go back to the rattlesnake. And the key moment is in Savannah in November 1860, November 8th in particular, when the secessionists in Savannah gather. It is called the Young Men's Southern Rights Club in Savannah. They spread a banner across the Nathaniel Greene Monument in Johnson Square, and that banner says, "Our motto, Southern rights and the equality of the states." And beneath it, there is a rattlesnake twisting above the words, "Don't tread on me." This is a drawing of the events by Henry Kleinworth in Savannah. This was not the only rattlesnake Don't Tread on Me combination reported in Savannah at the time. There was also another flag that was painted by a man named Thomas Shea that he hung over the armory, which had an oak tree and the rattlesnake Don't Tread on Me combination. Now, the news of what's happening in Savannah spreads through newspapers up and down the East Coast of America. And when the reports from Savannah come in, these descriptions always include descriptions of the flag. And so this is, the secessionists have raised the rattlesnake flag again, and it spreads like wildfire. What happens is secessionists across the country are raising their own Don't Tread on Me flags, and these are mostly homemade flags they are making themselves. In December, you get the Daily Telegraph reporting that the rattlesnake flag with Don't Tread on Me has been raised by the Reverend J.R. Willis at his pro-secession rally in Indian Springs. That same month, Raleigh's Weekly State Journal writes that the Southern Rights Club in Fayetteville has raised a flag which they say has, quote, "a beautiful representation of a pine tree and a rattlesnake in foil with the motto, 'Don't Tread on Me.'" The residents of Whitfield, Virginia raise one on a pole 80 feet high, which then has to be beaten by the residents of Taylor's Bridge, North Carolina, who raised theirs on one that's 5.5 feet. And then you start getting flags in the border states. Hannibal, Missouri. The newspaper there reports that the rattlesnake Don't Tread on Me is now raised above Palmyra. Then a Wisconsin paper reports that Unionists have gone and taken that flag down. from Palmyra. So the fights start to happen over that flag. Similar flags are being raised over boats. You get a report of the Anna E. Blubber, a schooner leaving Charleston, South Carolina, headed for Savannah, raising the Rattlesnake Don't Tread on Me flag for its sail. You get them not only just on flags, you get reports that this is now on calling cards in Baltimore. The New York Times repeats that these cards are in circulation. You get them also on Civil War envelopes. This shows you the stars and bars, which is, not Confederate battle flag. It is the original Southern Confederate flag. You have a rattlesnake here twined around the stars and bars saying, "Don't tread on us." It said, "Ever ready with our lot and fortunes." This particular envelope has the state seal of Virginia on it, but often you would see envelopes that had nothing underneath the "Don't tread on us" motto or seals of other Confederate states. So, and I do want to say that this is not the only servant flag, as they called it. Alabama, the Alabama secession flag. That one has a rattlesnake coming out from underneath a cotton bush with the Latin words "Noli me tangere." These are the words that Jesus spoke to Mary Magdalene after the resurrection, meaning "touch me not." So, and this is a black and white rendering. So this modern rendering will show you that it had 3 red flowers. Keep in mind the 3 red, and then the white cotton bolt is in cotton plants. Before you get the white cotton, you have the flower, and the flower has a sort of a dark pink iteration at one point. But this is the Alabama secession flag, and there was also the flag of Alabama's 4th Infantry, which has a snake at the bottom. It says "Noli me tangere," white cotton bowls, this time 5 red flowers. I always think it's interesting that the Alabama Department of Archives points out that they think these were designed by Francis Cora, who was an Italian immigrant who was a fresco painter in Italy before coming and painting flags in Montgomery, Alabama. If that's correct, it might help explain why we get "Noli me tangere" instead of "Don't tread on us." It's such an Italian thing to do, to go for the Latin. And also, any fresco painter from Italy would be familiar with Tra and Delico's "Noli me tangere" fresco in Florence. And in this one, the reason why I think, if it was Francis Cora, he might know this painting. He would also know the flower symbolism in it, where you have red and white flowers, and the 3 represents the Trinity, and 5 represents the wounds of Christ. South Carolina has the Confederate palmetto flag, where they take the original Confederate tree and crescent moon and they just wrap a rattler around it. This particular handkerchief-sized palmetto flag was supposed to have flown over Charleston during the bombing of Fort Sumter. So my point is that there are several rattlesnake flags out there. The Unionists hate all of them. Start getting into these fights over the symbolism. One of my favorite examples is what happens with sheet music illustration. I understand from Kaye that a couple of years ago you had a presentation just on this. This is "Down with the Traitors" serpent flag. Now, in the South and the North both started producing songs. You play the piano and sing in the parlor and sing the anti-Southern song or sing the anti-Union song. This was "Down with the Traitors" serpent flag, and you can't see it from a distance, but he is standing on a Confederate palmetto flag. So this officer, and he's got his sword poking right down into it. Also, in the Union Volunteers Quick Step, he is standing on the Confederate palmetto flag. I don't know why he's wearing gray. Some of you can explain that to me later. I would have thought the Union Volunteers should wear blue. But my point is that the Unionists are fighting back against these rattlesnake flags, and what they really seem to hate is the "Don't tread on me" flag and the "Don't tread on me" message. You get at this time in 1961, the Philadelphia Inquirer has an article that talks about what has happened in Boston. Apparently, a schooner from Savannah has arrived that is flying the "Don't tread on me" flag, and a big crowd assembles on the docks. They send a representative into the captain, and they say, "You take down that flag right now." The captain comes out, he sees the craft, takes down the rattlesnake flag, puts up the stars and stripes. The crowd gets the rattlesnake flag, and according To the Philadelphia Inquirer, quote, "The rattlesnake was eagerly seized and trampled upon by the multitude and then torn completely to tatters." So that gives you a sense of the emotion that is involved at this time. Another sense of the emotion comes from William Lloyd Garrison's newspaper, The Liberator. This is, one of the most preeminent abolitionist papers at the time. And they have an article that says, quote, "These rattlesnake lords have been threatening noisily the sovereign of this country with their venom for 30 years or more. They grovel in the dirt and shake their noisy appendages. Don't tread on me. While commerce and science and religion and philanthropy with war and harness are driving the car of progress through their fields and over their bodies, with no more regard to their don't tread on me than hissing of reptiles by in the path of human advancement, without sense enough to see that if they don't get out of the way, they must be crushed to death." So these are the arguments that are going back and forth against the rattlesnake lords, and the abolitionist newspaper. And so what the Unionists do with their symbolism, they take their eagle and have their eagle eating that rattlesnake. Now, you will know that that was a symbol for the triumph of good over evil before the Civil War. You might know the Mexican flag. This is what the national flag of Mexico looked like in 1861 at the beginning of the Civil War. It was a golden eagle eating a rattlesnake. So the Unionists run with that. And what they produce are their own envelopes in which you've got stars and stripes, you've got the eagle, and then you've got the stars and bars, a jam pattern. So there are a lot of eagle rattlesnake envelopes produced. It says at the bottom, "The eagle shall bear the rattlesnake in his beak and rend him with his talons." So that is the Unionist response. And now I want to conclude by bringing some women into this picture, because some of the Union women jumped right in. One was the Boston poet Mary Webb, who in one of these collections of poems, and you do get collections of anti-slavery poems, collection of pro-union poems at this time. She had a poem called "Our Massachusetts Dead," which included 2 lines that referred to our eagle in the serpent's coil. She's saying, we are dying, we are in the serpent's coil. But the next line says, "But bruising soon the serpent's head." And what she's referring to there is Old Testament prophecy from Genesis. What you know in Genesis is that you are told that God is promising that the serpent that bruised the heel of woman's seed would eventually have its head bruised by that same seed. So Genesis promises that with the coming of Christ, serpents shall be trod upon. And that prophecy is fulfilled in the Gospel of Luke, which it says in the King James translation, "Behold, I give unto you power to tread on serpents." So, the whole line is you can tread on serpents and scorpions. Nothing shall harm you. And so you've got this in the Gospel of Luke. Kind of wonder what happened with the colonial flag, because the Unionists just go straight to the Gospel of Luke, and it's not just a Protestant thing. This is why you have a whole tradition in the Catholic tradition of the Virgin Mary treading barefoot on serpents. So Mary Webb, Virgin Mary, the final thing I'm going to mention is Julia Ward Howe. That will live as a republic. Published in the Atlantic Monthly in 1862. And in the second stanza of it, she uses this New Testament version. Nobody looks at the second stanza these days. They just go, "My eyes seen one." But the second stanza includes, "Let the hero born of woman crush the serpent with his heel, since God is marching on." And this really illustrates why you shouldn't have words in your flags. Because, people love "Don't tread on me." It sounds so bad. And people just love it today as well. And yet, if you, like the Confederacy, are from a conservative Christian community, people can throw the Bible right back at you and say, "Behold, I'm your power to tread on serpents." So what you ultimately have by the end is the Union producing all sorts of images of here. Look at the feet of this female who represents liberty. She's treading on us, while the whole scene around her is showing all of the Confederates, Beauregard, Davis, Stevens, coffins for all of them, and the traitors' platform being hung. So it says at the bottom, "What the South shall see." But they have jumped on this iconography treading on serpents, Virgin Mary through liberty. And then when the South recognizes sort of problem with their symbology, what happens by 1862 is that when General Beauregard, the Army of Northern Virginia established in 1862, General Beauregard's flag was a variation on the cross of St. Andrew. That becomes the Confederate battle flag of the Army of Northern Virginia and Robert E. Lee. And so after 1862, all of these sightings of the Don't Tread on the Rattlesnake flag may disappear very quickly. It is just a 2-year period there where there's a massive rush on them. And after 1862, sightings of these flags disappear as Confederates relinquish the serpents and raise instead the Southern Cross. So, questions, comments? These days, you can see modern Gadsden flags where the snake is shaped as a uterus, and it's women saying they'll trample on our rights. It was also used by some labor organizers early in the 20th century at labor marches. So it's not just Confederates, but what's interesting is between the colonial period, because I tried to research it from the colonial period to the Tea Party, and it was only this 2-year period from 1860 to 1862 where you found this constant use of it. I was asked with all these cross currents sources, do I have a book in the works? I always have a book in the works because, as you heard in the introduction, I write novels, I write memoir. My first book was about the introduction of women into the Virginia Military Institute in Lexington. I was on their executive committee for co-education many years ago. And I have written recently, because I live in the Triangle South, and because I was present at the United Right Rally in Charlottesville in 2017. And once you've seen that, and then you go back to live in this town, teach at the university where Robert E. Lee is buried, where he was president after the Civil War, you have to reckon with your town's history, with your own history. And so I've written pieces in places like Time Magazine and Washington. This is one of many weird Confederate stories. I don't know if many of you know about the Confederate history of Los Angeles. It was a big Confederate stronghold during the Civil War. Hollywood is the name of the Confederate Valhalla in Richmond before it ever became Hollywood, California. So I'm interested in those odd things that people don't know about Confederate history. But I'm thinking if I write Confederates in War Closet.
In light of the biblical references to serpents, what would you recommend as iconography in lieu of snakes?
Well, there is the question, do you like eagles? Do you just want the bald eagle to be, what we need is unifying iconography. We don't need people taking separate animals and having them friend each other, especially now in America. And, I'd like for Americans to unite behind one flag, to unite behind, and stay south to north, rural, urban, that we have all of these ways that we can work together.